The Seahawks trade for defensive lineman Leonard Williams. The Giants received a 2024 second and a 2025 fifth-round pick. And this seems like a Seattle Seahawks type of move. We've seen them in the past make moves on the defensive line. We remember Frank Clark from a couple of seasons ago. And Seattle wants to continue to be that team to rush the passer, make a quarterback uncomfortable. That is what they do. That is part of their identity. And we know in today's NFL, that has to be a stipulation if you want to be a successful team. And we see the Seahawks right now are 5-2 team in the NFC. I believe I have that record right. I feel like I might have butchered that. What are they? No, are they 5-2? Are they 6-2? 5-2. I knew they had a bye. I was like, did they play 8 games? But I was confident with that 5-2 record. The Seahawks are in the lead in the NFC West. They are wanting to take control of this division. People are not wanting to, or excuse me, the franchise is not going to be counting out Geno Smith playing the way he is this year. JSN, DK Metcalf, obviously Devon Witherspoon, even though we know he's battled some injuries as well. So the Seattle Seahawks making the trade for Leonard Williams. I have no problem with this move. And the Giants get some pretty good compensation as well. 2 picks, but not to mention it being a next year second round pick and then a fifth round pick in the following year as well. So I'm not mad about the compensation for either team. And the Seahawks make this trade because, again, they want to rush that passer better. And we know the Giants are in the depths of the NFL right now. We saw them possibly being sellers at this deadline. And what was kind of funny is I was going to talk about buyers and sellers from the trade deadline. I think we're going to do that on the next episode because we had some heavy rumors and actual trades from the deadline that unfolded today. I didn't see the Giants being a team that would actually be sellers or really do anything at the trade deadline because I'm like, one, who could they bring in? They're such a rough team. I think they all understand, well, not as a team because they're going to have that confidence to go further. But people looking at the Giants know that the Giants are probably far gone this year. And I was wondering who could they really ship out? Where clearly Leonard Williams goes to Seattle. Now the Jags trade for the Vikings guard Ezra Cleveland. They also exchange a 6th rounder for him as well. Now you see the Vikings sending out one of their guards, and we know Ezra Cleveland is a offensive lineman that did sign not too long ago with the Minnesota Vikings. And we know that he's provided a decent role for this team as well. And you kind of wonder, you see Kirk Cousins tear his Achilles. Now we have Ezra Cleveland getting shipped out as well. Again, a 6th rounder also in that package being exchanged for him, going over to the Jaguars. But when I look at the Vikings, we understand that, Joshua Dobbs is now in place of Kirk Cousins. We're going to get into that in just a moment. But I would think you would want one of your better offensive linemen in an interior O-line that's trying to rebuild and trying to get better week over week. And even the fans and the analysts see that. You would think that they would want to keep one of their key pieces, but nonetheless, they ship him out. The Jags are going to benefit from him. And we know the Jags are steadily trying to build their O-line as well, as they have a Trevor Lawrence who is looking to be one of the top elite quarterbacks in this game, as they have a Tank Bigsby, as they have a Travis Etienne. A lot of moving parts with that team. And we know football is won and lost in the trenches. So I like the move for Cleveland, I like the move for the Jags and for Ezra Cleveland himself to go to a great team like the Jags. But with it happening with the Vikings, it did make me wonder because, one, you're going to want to have that protection for the replacement of Kirk Cousins, but two, especially with it being Joshua Dobbs, who I'm not very high on, who I'm not very high on realistically going over to Minnesota. Now, the Vikings trade for Josh Dobbs, as I just mentioned. They trade for Josh Dobbs and a 7th round pick. They pick up a 6th rounder I want to make sure I have it correctly. The Vikings traded for Josh Dobbs. They pick up a 6th rounder from this deal, and they send out a 7th rounder as well. So you see that Kirk Cousins had to have a replacement. We see the Minnesota Vikings after they beat the San Francisco 49ers. We understand that the Vikings were looking to turn the corner. I even said it. The Minnesota Vikings had turned the corner. They beat the Niners 22-17. Brock Purdy played the way he did. That not Vic Fangio. That Brian Flores defense stepped up, played the way that it was supposed to. And the Vikings that was supposed to come around the entire season, it felt like, actually came out in that Niners and Vikings game. But now you see Josh Dobbs coming in to replace Kirk Cousins. And with the Vikings sitting at a record of 4-4, it felt like they were really in the driver's seat to possibly take over this division or at least compete with the Detroit Lions for the NFC North. I don't trust Josh Dobbs to take this Vikings team really to, any type of success, really. I mean, look where he just came from with the Cardinals. I understand the build around him, but Josh Dobbs' numbers even then weren't jumping off the page. He wasn't making ridiculous plays. He wasn't doing the things that I believe Kirk Cousins can do inside this Vikings offense now halfway throughout the year, in order to see what the Vikings are going to do. But I do understand that the Vikings had to make a move for a quarterback here. Not going to depend on a whole lot from Josh Dobbs, and we'll get into this actual trade and Kirk tearing his Achilles and the Vikings schedule and everything. We'll hear more about it. But this was one that, again, wasn't a head scratcher because we know that Minnesota had to make a move. But Joshua Dobbs out of all quarterbacks, all right, we'll see about that. Now, the Bears traded a second rounder to the Washington Commanders to pick up Montez Sweat. I thought this was a decent trade. I don't like the second round pick aspect because I don't believe it's not even that I don't believe Montez is worth a second round pick, but understanding where the Bears are right now, again, a team that feels pretty far gone. I feel like the teams that make moves at the NFL trade deadline, whether you're buyers or sellers, if you're a buyer, you're on the verge. You have a weakness. You need something. If you're a seller, you're looking for draft capital. You're possibly rebuilding. It's a team that's not doing too well. So when I see the Bears, a team not doing too well, go and grab from, of course, another team that's not doing too well, taking Montez Sweat, I really would have preferred Montez to stay with the Washington Commanders. Of course, Chase Young gets out of there as well. So that was just the first domino of this falling. But we see Washington. Yes, they are a team that's got our, Eric Bieniemy and Sam Howell making things happen offensively. But with Ron Rivera still being that head coach and understanding that this team does have a long way to go to grow, maybe that was some of the mindset in sending it out. Because yes, Montez Sweat can provide for the Bears, no doubt. But I would have liked to see him go to a better destination. Now, maybe the biggest deal of the day, Chase Young traded to the San Francisco 49ers for a third round pick. And we saw that this Chase Young trade was possibly going to happen, whether it was in the offseason, whether it was just coming into the season, whether it was coming around this deadline, because Chase Young, despite having 12 and a half sacks in his rookie year, despite winning defensive rookie of the year, despite being that great player coming out of college, he dealt with the ACL injury. He dealt with injuries the year before. And we saw Washington not pick up the fifth-year option. And that just said something to me right there. I knew in that moment that Washington was not thinking in the long term, because we know when someone picks up a fifth-year option, the deal is coming. They believe in you. And he's still on a fully guaranteed deal, being the second overall pick out of this draft. So the Niners feels like they're stealing another great defensive lineman, second overall pick, arguably the best player in this draft in Chase Young, now on that defensive line with the Bosa, with every pass rusher that San Francisco presents. Chase Young gets to have a hand in that and be in the mix. And again, I knew Washington wasn't going to keep him, but shout out to the Niners for bringing Chase Young in. I think we're going to see a great bit of Chase Young in the back half of this year. We know Shanahan loves his defensive linemen. We know that the culture and that coaching staff over in San Francisco loves to have their defensive linemen play a key part in that defense. And we know the gauntlet of names that is up there on that defensive line. So I think this is a great landing spot for Chase Young to kind of reinvigorate his career, get into a good culture and system, and really find success here in the NFL. Now, I expected the Lions to be buyers at this deadline as well, and even specifically for their receiving core. And they were. They bring in Donovan Peoples-Jones from the Browns. 2025 sixth rounder is sent out for him, of course. And we see that there is a Josh Reynolds who is actually performing very well when you take a look at his numbers and the plays that he's making for the Detroit Lions this season. We see an Amon-Ra St. Brown. We see an emergence of Jamison Williams. We see a Sam Laporta. And now they're bringing in Donovan Peoples-Jones to go next to a David Montgomery when he comes back. We see Jahmyr Gibbs just break out. So the Lions are clearly thinking offensively driven, knowing that they're in a weak NFC, knowing that they have a chance to really go and make a case for this division, maybe even get into that NFC title game. I'm not mad at this move at all. Now, I don't think DPJ was the guy I necessarily would have targeted, but we know a Devontae Adams couldn't have necessarily come over here. He's a number one receiver. He's clearly unhappy in Vegas for a reason. I would have possibly liked an Adam Thielen maybe to come over from not Minnesota, Lord, from the Carolina Panthers, but DPJ, maybe he's about the same right now. Again, they get him for a sixth rounder. Credit to Dan Campbell and Jared Goff and really what that entire offense and team is doing. And the Vikings are just clearly, season isn't going the greatest. They don't even understand what's happening with Deshaun Watson. So they're just going to stack up these picks. And the last actual trade that went down at the trade deadline. The Bills trade for Rasul Douglas and the Packers 2025 fifth rounder. They send out a 2024 fourth rounder. So basically swap a third and a fifth and also bring in Rasul Douglas. And we knew that the Bills needed this because we've seen a Micah Hyde, we've seen a Jordan Poyer battle with injuries this season and in the past. And Buffalo is a team that has to stay solid. They have to stay consistent, especially on the defensive side of the ball. I'm not saying they're not a solid team defensively because we all know that they are. I do think they could be a little more consistent in that secondary play, but more than anything, staying healthy. I kind of expected the Packers to be sellers at this deadline as well, but I also had that same mindset of the Giants. Who would they realistically be able to ship off? For what amount could they actually get back for them? Well, the Bills identify a weakness in their secondary. They make a deal with the Packers to bring Rasul Douglas in, who's a respectable corner. I think over there in that Bills defense, he's going to fit in well. I think he's going to find his role. I think we can see Rasul Douglas making some plays on a bigger stage, really just by default of course, playing for the Buffalo Bills. But I want y'all in the comments and in the chat, let me know what you think about the actual NFL trade deadline